How did my own son turn my accent into a joke, like it proved I was less than him? Why did he look so sure I was the one who could be removed, until the knock came for him instead? Can you imagine hearing boots in the hallway and realizing the system you mocked is now reading your name out loud? My name is Emiliano Saldivar. Most people call me Emil. I'm 52 years old and I've worked at the same warehouse for the past 14 years. I started in shipping, moved to receiving, and now I supervise compliance, which is a fancy way of saying I make sure everything that comes in or goes out is documented correctly, tracked properly, and matches the paperwork. It's methodical work. It suits me. I still have an accent. After 28 years in this country, my English is solid, but you can hear where I came from in every sentence. The vowels sit differently in my mouth. Certain consonants require a half-second of adjustment. I never apologized for it, not once. It's part of who I am, like my fingerprints or the scar on my left hand from a packing tape dispenser that snapped back in 2013. My son, Nolan, thinks my accent is a joke. This morning started like most mornings. I was up at 5, made coffee in the small kitchen of my apartment, and sat at the table with a piece of toast and the kind of quiet that only exists before the world wakes up. Nolan showed up around 6:15. He has a key. He uses it whenever he feels like it, usually when he needs something or wants to remind me that this is still, technically, a family. He walked in without knocking, dropped his gym bag on the floor, and opened my fridge like he owned it. "Morning," I said. "Yeah." He pulled out the orange juice, drank straight from the carton, and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You got any of that bread left?" I pointed to the counter. He grabbed 2 slices, didn't toast them, just folded them in half and bit down. "I need you to come to something next week," he said, chewing. "Dinner thing? Brielle's setting it up. Family event. You gotta be there." "What kind of event?" Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. Does it matter? He gave me a look that I've seen 100 times, impatient, dismissive, like I'd asked a stupid question. "Just show up, wear something decent, and try not to—" He stopped mid-sentence, smiled a little. "Try not to embarrass me, yeah?" I didn't respond. I took a sip of coffee and kept my face neutral. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, exactly. Just the kind of laugh that lets you know he's about to say something that will land wrong. "I'm serious, Dad. No, I go to the store yesterday stuff. People are gonna be there." I set the mug down slowly. "My English is fine, Nolan." I know. I'm just saying." He shrugged, still smiling. "You know how it sounds sometimes." I know how it sounds. I also know that Nolan's been making comments like this for years. Little corrections, little jabs, always wrapped in the language of helpfulness. He'll repeat what I've said with the right pronunciation, emphasizing the difference just enough to make it clear I got it wrong. He does it in front of other people. He does it like it's a performance. When he was younger, maybe 13 or 14, he started asking me not to speak Spanish around his friends. Then he asked me not to speak at all if I could help it. By the time he was 16, he'd perfected the art of making me feel like a problem that needed managing. I watched him finish the bread, grab his gym bag, and head for the door. "See you later," he said. "Yeah." The door closed. The apartment went quiet again. I sat there for a while, staring at my coffee, trying to figure out when exactly my own son started treating me like I was less than him. An hour later, I was in the hallway by the mailboxes, checking for anything that needed my attention. Mrs. Ortiz from 3B was coming up the stairs with her groceries. I held the door for her. "Thank you, Emil," she said, smiling. "No problem." Nolan came down the hallway from the parking lot entrance, phone in his hand, still wearing his gym clothes. He saw me, saw Mrs. Ortiz, and his face shifted into something brighter, more social. "Hey, Mrs. O," he said. Good morning, Nolan. He stopped next to me, leaned against the wall like he was settling in for a conversation. You know, my dad here tried to tell me this morning that he'd go to the store yesterday. He said it with exaggerated slowness, mimicking my accent, adding an extra weight to the words that I've never used. I'm like, Dad, it's went. You went to the store. Mrs. Ortiz's smile tightened. She glanced at me, then back at Nolan. He's fine, Nolan, she said quietly. I know. I'm just messing with him. He clapped me on the shoulder, grinning. He knows I'm kidding. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. He held my gaze for a second, still smiling, then pulled his phone out and walked away. Mrs. Ortiz waited until he was gone. That boy, she muttered, shaking her head. I didn't respond. I went back into my apartment, grabbed my work bag, and left for the warehouse. By the time I got to the shipping lanes, the morning chaos was already in full swing. Forklifts, moving pallets, guys shouting coordinates across the floor, the steady beep of barcode scanners. I clocked in, checked the overnight logs, and started working through the compliance checklist. There was a mismatch in one of the outbound shipments, a pallet that had been logged as containing 8 boxes, but only had 7. Small mistake, easy to miss, but it would have caused a nightmare downstream if it had gone out. I flagged it, pulled the driver aside, and walked him through the recount. He thanked me. We fixed it. Nobody yelled. Nobody made a scene. This is where I'm good. This is where people listen to me. Yara Manu, one of the inventory leads, caught up with me near the loading dock around mid-morning. She's 34, sharp as hell, and one of the few people at work who treats me like a human being instead of a fixture. You okay? She asked, adjusting her clipboard. Yeah. Why? You just look... She paused, searching for the word. Tired. More than usual. I shrugged. Long morning. She nodded, didn't push. That's the thing about Yara. She knows when to let something breathe. Well, if you need anything, let me know. Thanks. She walked off, and I stood there for a second, watching the trucks pull in and out, the whole operation humming along like a machine that worked because people like me made sure it did. At work, I'm respected. At home, I'm managed. My phone buzzed in my pocket around noon. I pulled it out, expecting a text from Nolan or maybe a reminder about something I'd already forgotten. Instead, it was a voicemail notification. Unknown number. I listened to it during my lunch break, sitting in my car with the windows cracked. The voice was professional. Clipped. Not unfriendly, but not warm either. Mr. Saldivar, this is a follow-up regarding a matter that requires your attention. Please return this call at your earliest convenience. Reference number 7729. That was it. No context, no explanation, just a request to call back. I stared at the phone for a long time, trying to figure out what kind of matter would leave a message like that. My mind ran through possibilities, work, taxes, some old paperwork I'd forgotten about. Nothing clicked. I saved the number and put the phone away. Whatever it was, it could wait until after my shift. But the unease stayed with me for the rest of the day. I came to this country when I was 24, not on a plane with a suitcase full of dreams and a tourist visa that I'd overstay. I came the hard way, through the process, through the lines, through the paperwork that took years to clear. I had a sponsor, a job offer, and a willingness to do whatever it took to make it work. I learned English at night, community college classes, library books, and a lot of embarrassing conversations where I'd mispronounce something and have to start over. I worked in kitchens, in warehouses, in places where nobody cared what I sounded like as long as I showed up on time and did the work. When Nolan was born, I was 25 and still figuring out how to be a person in a new country, let alone a father. His mother left when he was 3. I don't blame her. We were young, broke, and I was working 60-hour weeks just to keep us fed. She wanted a different life. I couldn't give it to her. So it was just me and Nolan. I raised him the best I could. I made sure he had clothes, food, a roof. I taught him to be respectful, to work hard, to understand that nothing comes easy. I thought I was doing everything right. Somewhere around middle school, things changed. He started acting embarrassed when I picked him up from school. He'd walk 10 feet ahead of me in public. If I said something in Spanish, he'd wince like I'd slapped him. By high school, it was worse. He'd correct my English in front of his friends, laughing it off like it was all in good fun. He'd tell me to stay in the car when we went somewhere because he didn't want people to hear me talk. He said it was for my own good, that people would judge me, that I didn't understand how things worked here. I told myself it was just teenage stuff, that he'd grow out of it. He didn't. Now he's 27. He works in sales, tech stuff, I think, though he's never explained it in a way that makes sense to me. He drives a leased BMW, wears expensive clothes, and talks constantly about branding and optics and positioning. He's obsessed with image, with being seen as the right kind of person, and I'm the wrong kind. This morning, I was sitting in my compliance office at the warehouse, going through a stack of shipping manifests, when my mind drifted back to something that happened a few months ago. Nolan had asked me to go with him to some kind of public service office, DMV, maybe, or something related to vehicle registration. I don't remember exactly. What I remember is standing in line with him, waiting for his number to be called, and listening to him complain. "This is ridiculous," he'd muttered, loud enough for people around us to hear. "Look at this place. Half these people shouldn't even be here." I glanced around. The room was full of people who looked like they were just trying to get through the day. Families, older folks, people who needed help with paperwork. "Nolan," I said quietly. "What?" "It's true. You know it's true. You waited in these lines for years, right? You know how it is. People cutting corners, people trying to game the system." I didn't respond. I just stood there, feeling the weight of his words settle over me like a coat I didn't ask to wear. When his number was called, he turned to me and said, "You should be grateful, you know, that you did it the right way, that you're allowed to be here." Allowed. Like my presence was a favor someone had granted me out of kindness. I think about that moment a lot. I think about the way he said it, casual, offhand, like he was stating a fact. And I think about the way I responded, which was to nod and say nothing. I've been doing that a lot lately, nodding and saying nothing. But this morning, sitting in my office, I realized something. I realized that Nolan's legal status, his allowed to be here status, was something I'd never actually thought about. He was born here. That's all I ever needed to know. But now, watching him talk about lines and paperwork people and workarounds, I started noticing things. He avoids anything that requires official forms. When something comes up that needs a signature or documentation, he deflects. He gets nervous. He changes the subject fast. Last week, I asked him if he'd updated his driver's license after moving apartments. He snapped at me, told me to mind my own business. Then he laughed it off, said he'd handle it, and left. It was such a small moment, but it stuck with me. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I started writing things down, not accusations, just facts, dates, conversations, little moments that didn't mean anything on their own but might mean something together. I didn't know what I was doing, I just knew I was tired of being the problem. That evening, I was eating dinner at a cheap diner near the warehouse when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered it. "Mr. Saldivar?" "Yes." "This is a follow-up to the message we left earlier. We need to speak with you regarding a matter of compliance." My stomach tightened. "What kind of compliance?" "We can discuss that in person. Are you available tomorrow afternoon?" I hesitated. "Can you tell me what this is about?" "It's regarding documentation that was submitted on your behalf. We need to verify some information." Documentation on my behalf. I hadn't submitted anything recently. Not for work, not for taxes, not for anything. "I'll call you back," I said. I hung up before they could respond. I sat there for a long time, staring at my half-eaten burger, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Then I called a number I hadn't used in years. A man I knew from the old community center, back when I was still taking English classes and learning how to navigate the system. Armand Vey. He was an attorney now. Immigration and civil cases. Quiet guy. Methodical. The kind of person who didn't waste words. "Emil?" he said when he picked up. "Yeah, it's me. It's been a while." "I know. I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "If someone submitted documentation on my behalf, something I didn't know about, would I be responsible for it?" There was a pause. "Depends on what it is." "Why do you ask?" "I got a call. Someone saying they need to verify information. I don't know what they're talking about." "Do you have the number?" I gave it to him. He was quiet for a long time. "I'll look into it," he said finally. "Don't respond to them until you hear from me." "Okay." "And Emil? If someone's using your name for something, you need to tell me everything, no matter how small it seems." "I will." I hung up and sat there, feeling the weight of something I couldn't name yet pressing down on my chest. Later that night, I was back at my apartment, sitting on the couch, when I heard voices in the hallway, Nolan's voice, and another guy, Devin Rusk, one of his friends, loud, confident, the kind of guy who's always filming something on his phone. I could hear them through the door. "Paper problems are easy if you know the right workaround," Nolan said, laughing. "Seriously?" "Yeah, man. You just need someone who knows how to navigate the system. Brielle's got a contact. Makes things disappear." They moved past my door, their voices fading down the hallway. I sat there in the dark, staring at the wall, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Just a cold, clear understanding that whatever was happening, it was bigger than I thought. 3 days later, Brielle invited me to dinner at her apartment. Well, invited isn't the right word. Nolan texted me and said I was expected to be there. No asking, just an instruction. Brielle Cade is Nolan's fiancée, though they've been engaged for 2 years and haven't set a date. She's 26, works in some kind of marketing role, and has perfected the art of making everything sound polite while meaning the exact opposite. She's polished in a way that feels practiced, like she's always performing. Her apartment is in one of those new buildings downtown, the kind with a lobby that looks like a hotel and a guy at the front desk who checks IDs. Everything inside is white or gray, minimalist, expensive in a way that's supposed to look effortless. When I arrived, Nolan was already there, sitting on the couch with his shoes off, scrolling through his phone. Brielle opened the door, smiled, and said, "Emil, so glad you could make it." She said my name like it was fragile, like she was being careful with it. "Thanks for having me," I said. "Of course. Come in, come in." The apartment smelled like candles and something I couldn't identify, maybe essential oils. There were other people there, a couple I didn't know. Devin, a woman who introduced herself as a friend of Brielle's. Everyone was holding wine glasses and talking in that loud, performative way people do when they want to seem interesting. Nolan waved me over. "Dad, this is Marcus and Jenna. They work with Brielle." I shook their hands. Marcus had one of those handshakes that's too firm, like he's trying to prove something. Jenna smiled politely and looked past me. "Nice to meet you," I said. "Likewise," Marcus said. Then he turned to Nolan. "So this is your dad? I didn't know you were—" "Yeah," Nolan cut in quickly. "He came here a long time ago. Did the whole process. Very legal, very proper." He laughed like it was a joke. "Not like some people, right?" Marcus laughed too. I didn't. Brielle appeared with a glass of wine and handed it to me. "Here you go. We're so happy you're here, Emil. Nolan talks about you all the time." I doubted that, but I took the wine and said, "Thank you." She leaned in a little, lowered her voice like she was sharing a secret. "You know, I think it's so brave, what you did. Coming here. building a life. You must have been so lucky to get through all that paperwork. Some people wait forever. Lucky. I nodded. It took time. I'm sure it did. She smiled, then turned to the group. Everyone, this is Emil, Nolan's father. He's originally from Mexico. Originally, like I was a product with a label. Cool, Devin said, raising his glass. What part? Guanajuato. Never heard of it. Most people haven't. He laughed. Yeah, I bet. The conversation moved on. People talked about work, about plans for the weekend, about some new restaurant they all wanted to try. I stood there holding my wine, trying to figure out why I'd been asked to come. Then Brielle cleared her throat and addressed the room. So, I wanted everyone to meet Emil tonight, because Nolan and I think it's important to, honor where we come from. Family is everything, right? Nolan nodded, looking serious, like he was in on some script. And Emil here, Brielle continued, represents such an important story. The immigrant story. The idea that if you work hard and follow the rules, you can make it in America. Nolan's so proud of him. I looked at Nolan. He was smiling, nodding along, like this was the most sincere thing he'd ever heard. Anyway, Brielle said, I just think it's beautiful. And I think we should all appreciate people like Emil, who did things the right way. There was a small round of applause. Actual applause, like I was a show-and-tell project. Nolan stood up, walked over, and put his arm around my shoulders. Yeah, my dad's a great example. I mean, his English isn't perfect, obviously. He laughed. But he tries, and that's what matters. I felt it then. The switch, not anger, not even hurt. Just a cold, clear understanding that this wasn't love. This wasn't family. This was something else. I stepped away from him. Excuse me, I said. I need to use the restroom. I walked down the hallway, past the perfectly staged photos on the wall, and into the bathroom. I locked the door, turned on the fan, and stood there, breathing slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth, like I was counting steps on a job site. Calm, methodical, clear. I thought about something Father Lucero had told me once years ago, when I was still trying to make sense of being a single parent. He was a volunteer at the community center, a priest who helped people with immigration paperwork and English classes. Older guy, quiet, kind. He'd said, "You don't beg for dignity, Emil. You set the terms for it." I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but standing there in Brielle's expensive bathroom, listening to muffled laughter through the door, I understood. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I wrote down the date, the people who were there, the things Nolan and Brielle had said, the way they'd framed me. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked tired, but my eyes were steady. I could see the man I'd been when I first arrived in this country, determined, methodical, willing to do what was right even when it was hard. That man was still here. He'd just been quiet for too long. I splashed cold water on my face, dried it with one of Brielle's pristine white hand towels, and opened the door. When I stepped back into the hallway, I could hear Nolan's voice from the living room, telling some story that was making everyone laugh. I stood there for a moment, just listening, and realized that I didn't want to go back in there. I didn't want to be part of whatever performance they were staging, but I had to. Not for them, for me. Because walking out now would give Nolan another story to tell, another way to frame me as the problem. So I walked back into the living room and stood near the edge of the group. Brielle noticed me and smiled. "There you are. We were just talking about the dinner next week. You're coming, right?" "Yes," I said. "Perfect. It's going to be such a special night." She glanced at Nolan, and something passed between them. A look I couldn't quite read. The rest of the evening blurred together. More wine, more small talk, more careful comments from Brielle about how inspiring my story was. More moments where Nolan would slip in a little joke about my accent or my work or the way I did things. Around 9:30, people started leaving. I waited until most of the guests were gone, then told Nolan I needed to go. "All ready?" he said. "I thought we could talk." "About what?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Life, work. You seem tense lately." I looked at him for a long moment. "I'm fine." "You sure? Because if something's bothering you—" "I'm fine, Nolan." He held my gaze, and for just a second, I saw something flicker in his expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or suspicion. But then it was gone, replaced by his usual confidence. "All right, well, I'll see you next week. Big dinner, don't forget." "I won't." I left the apartment, took the elevator down to the parking garage, and sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from something else, from the feeling that I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Then I made a call. Armand Vey answered on the second ring. "Emil?" "Yeah, I need to talk to you. In person." "When?" "Soon, tomorrow if possible." There was a pause. "Can you tell me what this is about?" "I think my son is involved in something that could put him at risk, and I think he's been using my name." Another pause. Longer this time. "Okay, come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. "Okay. And Emil?" "Yeah?" "Bring everything. Dates, messages, names, anything you can remember." I hung up and sat there in the parking garage, staring at the concrete wall in front of me, and felt something settle inside me. A decision, a commitment, a line drawn in the sand that I wouldn't cross back over. I started the car and drove home through empty streets, the city lights blurring past my windows like distant memories. When I got to my apartment, I didn't turn on the TV or pour myself a drink or do any of the things I usually did to wind down. I just sat at my kitchen table and started writing. Everything I could remember, every conversation, every moment where Nolan had said something that didn't add up, every time he'd dodged a question about paperwork or documentation. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the words started to blur together on the page, until I had a timeline that told a story I didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. My son was in trouble, and somehow I was part of it. Armand Vey's office was in a small building near the courthouse, not fancy, just clean, organized, and quiet. The kind of place where people go when they need real help, not a show. I arrived at 9 a.m. exactly. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked me to sign in and told me Armand would be with me shortly. I sat in the waiting area, watching people come and go. Most of them looked nervous. Some looked tired. All of them looked like they were carrying something heavy. I recognized that feeling. I'd been carrying something heavy for years. I just hadn't realized it until recently. Armand came out 10 minutes later. He was in his mid-40s, tall, with graying hair and the kind of face that doesn't give anything away. He shook my hand. "Emil, good to see you." "You too. Come on back." His office was small but organized, bookshelves lined with legal texts, a desk with neat stacks of folders, a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Everything had its place. Everything made sense. He sat down, gestured for me to do the same, and folded his hands on the desk. "So," he said, "tell me what's going on." I told him everything. The phone calls, the messages, the things Nolan had said, the way he talked about workarounds and shortcuts, the way he avoided paperwork, the way Brielle had framed me at that dinner, the conversation I'd overheard between Nolan and Devon about making paper problems disappear. Armand listened without interrupting. He took notes on a yellow legal pad, his handwriting small and precise. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. "Do you have any of these messages saved?" he asked finally. "Some. Text messages from Nolan, dates I wrote down, notes from conversations." "Good. I'll need copies of all of that." He pulled out a notepad and started writing. "You said Nolan mentioned a contact who makes paper problems disappear. Did he say who?" "No. just that Brielle knew someone. And the conversation you overheard, where was that? Outside my apartment, in the hallway. They were walking past. He wrote that down. Did anyone else hear it? I don't think so. It was late. He nodded, still writing. Okay. And you're certain your own status is clean? Completely. I have copies of everything. Green card, naturalization certificate, tax records going back 20 years. It's all in order. He looked up at me. That's good. That's very good. Why? He set his pen down and looked at me carefully. Because if someone's using your name or information to facilitate something fraudulent, you need to be able to prove you had no part in it. And if your son is involved in something that puts him at risk, you need to decide how much you're willing to protect him. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, feeling the weight of that sentence. Here's what I need you to do, Armand said. Document everything, every conversation, every request, every time Nolan or Brielle asks you to do something or sign something. Don't sign anything without showing it to me first. Don't agree to anything verbally. If they push you, tell them you need time to think. Okay. And Emil? He leaned forward. You need to understand that if this goes where I think it's going to get very uncomfortable. Family situations always do. There will be anger. There will be accusations. You need to be ready for that. I'm ready. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. I'll start making some calls. I'll reach out to the number that contacted you and see what's going on. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. Stay calm. Stay methodical. Don't react emotionally. I won't. Good. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I'll call you when I know something. I shook his hand and left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, exactly, but a sense of movement. Like I wasn't just sitting still anymore, absorbing everything. I was doing something. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept a log. I wrote down everything. When Nolan called, what he said, when Brielle texted, what she asked for. I saved screenshots of messages. I noted dates and times. I recorded the little moments that might not seem important on their own, but could be significant together. At work, I requested routine records, shift logs, security sign-ins, anything that created a paper trail of my whereabouts and my actions. I didn't tell anyone why. I just asked for copies, filed them away in a folder at home, and kept moving. Yara noticed. One afternoon, she caught up with me near the loading dock where I was checking a shipment manifest. You applying for something? She asked, adjusting her clipboard. Just keeping track of things, I said. She raised an eyebrow. That's pretty vague. I know. She looked at me for a moment, like she was trying to decide whether to push. Then she nodded. Well, if you need anything, and I mean anything, let me know. Thanks, Yara. I'm serious, Emil. You've been looking, I don't know, like you're carrying something heavy. And if there's a way I can help, I want to. I felt something catch in my throat. It was such a simple offer, but it meant more than she probably realized. I appreciate that. Really. She nodded again and walked off, leaving me standing there with the manifest in my hand and a strange warmth in my chest. It was the first time in weeks that someone had offered to help without wanting something in return. One evening, about 10 days after my meeting with Armand, I went to see Father Lucero at the community center. He was in one of the side rooms, helping an older woman fill out a form. When he saw me, he smiled, finished up with her, and waved me in. Emil, he said, it's been too long. I know. We sat down at one of the small tables, and I told him what was happening. Not all of it. Just enough. The way Nolan treated me. The things he'd said. The realization that he might be involved in something illegal. Father Lucero listened with the kind of patience that comes from years of hearing confessions and hard truths. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. You know what you need to do, he said finally. I think so. Then why are you here? I hesitated. Because I don't know if it's the right thing. He's my son. Father Lucero leaned forward, his eyes steady. Let me ask you something. If Nolan were treating someone else the way he treats you, a coworker, a friend, a stranger, what would you tell him? I didn't answer. You'd tell him to stop, Father Lucero said. You'd tell him it's wrong. That love doesn't look like that. That respect isn't optional. But he's my son, I said again. I know. And that's why this is hard. But love without boundaries isn't love, Emil. It's permission. Permission for cruelty, permission for harm, and eventually it becomes enabling. I sat there, feeling the truth of that settle into my chest like a stone. You don't have to hurt him, Father Lucero said gently. But you don't have to protect him from the consequences of his own choices either. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the truth. I thought about that for a long time. About the difference between protecting someone and enabling them. About the line between love and complicity. What if he never forgives me? I asked. Father Lucero smiled sadly. Then that's his choice. But you can't live your life trying to earn forgiveness for doing the right thing. You just have to do it and trust that the truth matters more than comfort. I left the community center that night feeling something shift inside me. Not anger, not revenge. Just a calm certainty that I was done being the person who absorbed everything and said nothing. Done being the person who made himself smaller so Nolan could feel bigger. I was done. 2 days later, Nolan called. I was at work in my compliance office when my phone rang. Hey, Dad, I need you to do me a favor. What kind of favor? I need you to co-sign something. Just a formality, paperwork thing. My stomach tightened. What kind of paperwork? Does it matter? It's not a big deal, just need your signature. I took a breath, counted to 3. I'm not signing anything without seeing it first. There was a pause. What's that supposed to mean? It means I need to see it, read it, understand what it is, make sure it's something I'm comfortable with. Comfortable with? His voice had an edge now. Dad, it's just a signature. It takes 2 seconds. Then it shouldn't be a problem for me to read it first. Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. You know what? He said finally. Forget it. I'll figure it out. He hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, and felt the weight of what I'd just done. I'd said no. Calmly. Without apology, without backing down. And it had felt right. That night, my phone lit up with a message from the family group chat. Nolan had sent a long paragraph about a celebration dinner he was planning. A big event, lots of people, important for family unity. The message ended with, Dad, you have to be there. No excuses. This is important. I read it twice, then I read it again. I could see what this was. It wasn't just a dinner, it was a stage, a performance, a chance for Nolan to put me in front of an audience and remind everyone, including me, of my place in his world. But this time, I wasn't going to play along. I typed back a simple response. I'll be there. Because I would be. But not for the reasons Nolan thought. Not to smile and nod and let him mock my accent in front of his friends. Not to be the show-and-tell project or the humble immigrant father who knows his place. I'd be there for me, to set the terms, to draw the line, to make it clear that respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you set the terms for. The dinner was scheduled for a Saturday night at some upscale restaurant downtown. Nolan had rented a private room. He kept texting me details all week. What time to arrive, what to wear, what not to say. Dress nice. Button-down shirt, no jeans. Get there by 7, don't be late. And Dad, seriously, just be cool. Don't make this weird. Each message felt like a small instruction manual on how to be acceptable, how to fit into the world Nolan was trying to build. A world where I was supposed to be grateful for being included, as long as I followed the rules. I didn't respond to most of the messages. I just read them, saved them to my notes app with timestamps, and kept preparing. The morning of the dinner, I stood in my apartment, looking at myself in the mirror. Clean white shirt, pressed and tucked in, dark pants. My belt was simple, worn but well maintained. My shoes were polished. Not because Nolan had told me to dress nice, but because I wanted to look at myself and see the man I'd become. Someone who had worked hard, built a life, earned his place. My hands were steady as I buttoned the shirt. My breathing was calm. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was just ready. I thought about calling Armand, but I didn't need to. We'd already talked earlier in the week. He'd confirmed what I suspected, that there was an active inquiry involving Nolan's status, and that it had nothing to do with me. Documentation had been submitted using my information, but I hadn't authorized it. The timeline I'd provided had been helpful. The messages I'd saved had been even more helpful. He'd also told me something else, something that settled into my chest like a weight I'd been carrying without realizing it. Cooperation with lawful processes is not betrayal, Emil. It's just truth. Truth. I looked at my reflection one more time. My face showed the years, lines around my eyes, gray in my hair, the weathered look of someone who'd worked with his hands and his back for most of his life. But my eyes were clear, steady. The eyes of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment. I arrived at the restaurant at 6:50, early. I've always been early. It's a habit from years of shift work, where being late meant someone else had to cover for you. The valet took my keys with a polite smile, and I walked through the main entrance into a lobby that smelled like expensive cologne and fresh flowers. The hostess was young, maybe 22, dressed in all black with perfect makeup. She smiled when she saw me. "Good evening. Are you with the Saldivar party?" "Yes," I said. "Right this way, sir." She led me down a hallway toward the back of the restaurant. The carpet was thick, absorbing the sound of footsteps. The walls were decorated with modern art, the kind that looks expensive but doesn't actually show anything recognizable. I could hear voices ahead, laughter, the clinking of glasses. The private room had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the city. A long table was set for about 20 people, with white linens and arrangements of flowers I couldn't name. Soft lighting made everything look warm and inviting, like a scene from a movie. Nolan was already there, standing near a small bar in the corner, talking to Brielle and Devon. He saw me and waved me over with a big smile. "There he is," he said, "the man of the hour." I walked over slowly, taking in the room, the layout, the exits, the way the chairs were positioned, old habits from warehouse work. Always know your surroundings. Brielle kissed me on the cheek. Her perfume was strong, floral. "Emil, you look great." "Thank you." Devon nodded at me. "Hey, Mr. S." Nolan handed me a drink, whiskey, neat, and clinked his glass against mine. The ice cubes rattled. "Thanks for coming, Dad. This means a lot." "Of course," I said. More people started arriving. I recognized some of them from Brielle's apartment, co-workers of Nolan's, friends of Brielle's. A few people I didn't recognize at all. Everyone was dressed well. Suits, dresses, the kind of clothes people wear when they want to impress each other. Phones came out almost immediately. People taking photos, selfies, group shots, the flash going off every few seconds like lightning. This wasn't just a dinner. It was content, material for social media, a story to tell. I found a seat near the end of the table and sat down. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Yara. "Good luck tonight. You've got this." I hadn't told her what was happening, but she knew something was. And that small message, those 5 words, made me feel less alone. Not because she was going to rescue me or fix anything, but because someone saw me. Really saw me. I typed back, "Thanks." Then I put my phone away and watched the room fill up. Nolan was in his element, moving from group to group, laughing loud, making sure everyone was having a good time. Brielle stood next to him, always touching his arm, always smiling, always performing. Around 7:15, the waiters started bringing out appetizers, small plates of food I didn't recognize, things with French names and careful arrangement. People ate and complimented the presentation and took more photos. Nolan stood up and tapped his glass with a fork. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at him. "All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight," he said. His voice had that practiced quality, like he'd rehearsed this. "This is really special for me and Brielle. We wanted to bring everyone together to celebrate. Well, a lot of things. Success, family, the future we're building." There was a round of applause. Nolan smiled, holding up his hand like he was accepting an award. I also wanted to take a moment to recognize my dad. He gestured toward me. Emil Saldivar, the man who came to this country with nothing and built a life through hard work and determination. He's the reason I'm here. The reason I understand what it means to earn something. More applause. People looked at me, smiling. Some raised their glasses. I didn't smile back. I just nodded once. Nolan kept going. "My dad's English isn't perfect. Never has been." He laughed, and a few people laughed with him. "But that's part of his charm, right? It reminds us where we came from. It reminds us that not everyone gets things handed to them." He paused, looking around the room, making sure everyone was paying attention. "You know, I think there's something beautiful about struggle. About fighting for your place. My dad did that. He waited in lines, he filled out forms, he did everything by the book. And I respect that. Even if he still says things like, 'I go to the store yesterday.'" The room erupted in laughter. Not mean laughter exactly, just the kind of laughter that happens when someone says something that sounds funny. But I heard it differently. I heard the mockery wrapped in affection, the condescension disguised as tribute. Nolan raised his glass higher. "To my dad, for showing me what real work looks like, for teaching me to appreciate the process, for being an example of doing things the right way." "To Emil," someone shouted. The room echoed it. "To Emil." Glasses clinked. People drank. Nolan sat down, still grinning, and Brielle leaned over to whisper something to him. He nodded, laughed, and squeezed her hand. I sat there, perfectly still, and felt something inside me settle into place, a cold, hard clarity. This was it. This was the moment Nolan thought he'd won. The moment where he got to frame me, define me, reduce me to a punchline in front of everyone he wanted to impress. But he was wrong. The waiters brought out the main course. More food I didn't recognize. People ate and talked and laughed. The noise level rose. More phones came out. More photos. More videos. Devin was filming something, narrating it like he was documenting a historic event. I stayed quiet. I ate a little, drank water, watched. And then, around 8:15, I heard it. A shift in the noise from the main restaurant. A pause in the background music. Then footsteps. Measured, deliberate, coming down the hallway toward the private room. I knew those footsteps. I'd been waiting for them. My hands stayed steady on the table. My breathing stayed calm. I didn't look at the door. I just waited. The door opened. 2 people stepped inside. A man and a woman, both in dark clothing, both carrying the kind of presence that makes a room go silent. The man was in his 40s, Officer Keenan Holt, though I wouldn't learn his name until later. The woman was younger, maybe early 30s. Both had badges clipped to their belts. The conversation stopped. The laughter died. Everyone turned to look. The man scanned the room, his eyes moving from face to face, methodical and precise. Then they landed on someone near the middle of the table. "Nolan Saldivar?" he said. The room went completely silent. The kind of silence that feels like pressure in your ears. Nolan looked up, his fork halfway to his mouth. Yeah? We need to speak with you. Can you step outside, please? Nolan's face shifted. Confusion became panic just for a second before he covered it with a forced laugh. What's this about? We can discuss that outside, the officer said. His tone wasn't rude, just firm, professional, the tone of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Nolan set his fork down slowly. He looked around the room like he was searching for someone to explain what was happening. His eyes landed on me. Dad, he said. His voice was higher than usual, tighter. What's going on? I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. The officer stepped closer to the table. Mr. Saldivar, we're not here for your father. We're here for you. Nolan's voice got louder. For me? Why? There's an active inquiry regarding documentation submitted under your name. We need you to come with us to clarify some information. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the restaurant's air conditioning and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Brielle stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is a mistake. Nolan's documentation is fine. The officer didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Nolan. That's what we're here to verify. If everything is in order, this will be quick. Nolan's hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of the table like he needed it to stay upright. I don't understand. I haven't done anything wrong. Then you have nothing to worry about, the officer said. But Nolan did have something to worry about. I could see it in his face. The way his eyes darted around the room. The way his jaw clenched. The way he suddenly looked smaller, younger, more vulnerable than I'd seen him in years. He looked at me again. Really looked at me. And I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Dad, he said. His voice cracked. Tell them I'm fine. Tell them. Nolan, I said quietly. I can't tell them anything that isn't true. His face twisted. What the hell does that mean? I stood up slowly. My chair didn't scrape. I moved with the same calm, methodical precision I used at work. The room was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. It means, I said, that I stopped covering for you. The words landed like a stone in still water. Ripples of shock moved through the room. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered something I couldn't hear. Nolan stared at me. Covering for me? What are you talking about? The phone calls, I said. My voice was steady, level. The messages, the workaround conversations, the way you avoid paperwork, the way you asked me to co-sign things without explaining what they were. I documented all of it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I continued. 3 months ago, I was contacted about documentation that had been submitted using my information. I didn't submit it. I didn't authorize it, so I cooperated with the inquiry. I gave them dates, messages, a timeline, everything I had. Brielle's face went from shock to fury. You reported your own son? I didn't report him, I said. I just stopped lying. Devin, who'd been silent this whole time, slowly put his phone down on the table. The recording light was still on. He reached over and turned it off. The officer spoke again. Mr. Saldivar, we need to go now. Nolan's panic was fully visible now. His voice got higher, more desperate. Dad, please, you can't do this. I'm your son. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd spent years making me feel small. Who'd mocked my accent, my work, my very presence in his life. Who'd treated me like a liability, an embarrassment, a problem to be managed. Yes, I said. You're my son, and that's why this hurts. But you made your choices, Nolan. You mocked the system I respected. You treated people like me, people who did it the right way, like we were the problem. And then you tried to cheat that same system when it suited you. His face crumpled. I didn't mean. You did, I said. You knew exactly what you were doing. You talked about workarounds. You bragged about knowing people who could make problems disappear. And you thought you could get away with it because you always have, because I always let you. The officer moved closer to Nolan. Sir. Nolan didn't move. He just stood there, shaking, staring at me like I was someone he didn't recognize. Your accent, he said quietly. His voice was barely a whisper. I made fun of your accent. Yes, I said. You did. And you... His voice broke. You did this because of that? No, I said. I did this because you needed to understand that actions have consequences, that respect isn't optional, that the system you mocked doesn't care about your swagger or your car or your brand. It cares about the truth. The officer took Nolan by the arm, gently but firmly. We need to leave now. Nolan looked around the room one more time. At Brielle, who'd gone pale and silent. At Devon, who was staring at the table. At the other guests, who were frozen in their seats, phones down, faces blank with shock. Then he looked back at me. You're supposed to protect me, he said. His voice was small now, childlike. I felt something twist in my chest, a pain that was sharp and real and unavoidable. But I didn't look away. I did protect you, I said, for years. I protected you from the truth. I protected you from consequences. I let you treat me like I was less than human because I thought that's what fathers do. But that was wrong. That was the worst thing I could have done. The officer started guiding Nolan toward the door. Nolan didn't resist. He just walked, his shoulders slumped, his confidence completely gone. He looked back at me one more time before the door closed. And then he was gone. The room stayed silent for what felt like an eternity. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I could hear people breathing. I could hear the faint sound of traffic from outside. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and strong. Brielle finally stood up. Her face was hard now, angry. This is ridiculous. This is... She stopped, looked at me, and her voice dropped to something cold. You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said, but I don't think so. She grabbed her purse and walked out. Devon followed without saying a word. One by one, the other guests started leaving. They gathered their things in silence, avoided eye contact, moved quickly like they wanted to get away from something contagious. Within 10 minutes, the room was empty except for me and the waiters, who were standing by the door, unsure of what to do. I walked over to the bar, picked up my water glass, and took a long drink. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I felt exhausted and awake at the same time, like I'd just finished a long shift at the warehouse. I thought about Nolan's face, the fear, the confusion, the realization that the person he'd spent years belittling had just dismantled his entire world with nothing but the truth. I thought about the times he'd mocked my accent, the times he'd made me feel like I didn't belong, the times he'd treated me like I was less than human. And I thought about what Father Lucero had said. You don't beg for dignity. You set the terms for it. I set my glass down and walked out of the restaurant. The valet brought my car around. I tipped him $20, more than I usually would, but tonight felt like a night for being generous. I got in and drove home through the quiet streets of the city. When I got to my apartment, I sat on the couch and stared at the wall for a long time. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I was just done. My phone buzzed. A text from Yara. How did it go?